I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com.
So, Eamon, the Gardaí are set to step up their patrols around Rathkeale over the Christmas period, which I think they do every year, and you've reported on many times over the years. But things are particularly tense down there at the moment, and there have been an outbreak, a serious outbreaks of violence. Tell us why, for a start, they tend to step up the patrols at Christmas.
Well, even in bygone years, when there wasn't necessarily any tension between, rival factions of various clans who were involved, individual members who were involved in crime, it's important to mention, I suppose, from the start that just because you have a certain surname doesn't mean you're a criminal, but there may be members of your wider family are, and unfortunately, everyone gets lumped into the same boat. Certainly in terms of, there's a lot of innocent people who've been attacked, connected to these Rathkeel feuds, people who have no direct link to any kind of criminality or any acts of violence themselves, have found their cars and houses being burnt out simply because they're a cousin or they're somehow connected with, a serious protagonist in these things, and it's deeply unfair. But yeah, look, there's been, even last year they were talking about closing off roads at one point so that the guards could effectively operate checkpoints, but that was dropped, I think, due to concerns by local people saying it was a bit over the top. It's like creating a green zone in downtown Baghdad at the height of the American operation against Saddam Hussein or something. But they do run an operation every year, and a lot of it is based on trying to dampen it down. In the past, like, the worst behaviour, used to be just young lads driving the fancy cars that we brought home to, people to show off.
Because a lot of people come home from Europe, really, is it, for the Christmas?
Yeah, look, traditionally it was like the traveller traders who would be working across Europe and further afield, doing, all sorts of different businesses, from selling power washers, generators, household goods, electronics, some of them involved in paving, some of them involved in, white lines on car parks, and selling furniture at trade fairs and flower shows, all this kind of stuff. And within that group, there are some people who are involved in criminality at all sorts of levels. Yeah. So you have people who are doing, they're pretending to be pavers or tarmac adamers, and they're actually just rip-off artists, and they're stealing money from people, tricking them into it as deception. And then you also have people who are international drug dealers connected directly to some of the serious Limerick gangs. They have connections with the UK and, again, further afield. We've spoken about them before, members of the Dead Zoo gang, who were specialists, I suppose, one time in antiques, and but the rhino horns. The reason we call them the Dead Zoo gang is because they were stealing rhino horns from natural history museums across Europe. There was hundreds of them. They were selling them on to the Chinese, the illicit Chinese medicine market.
It's funny when you see all these Europol reports and international reports, and the Rathkeel Rovers is it gets time of place.
Yeah, and their first mention was in 2010. I remember Europol, and that was Operation Oakleaf. And at that stage, like, we had done a couple of stories. I think we went down for another reason to try and get a picture of somebody, and the photographer I was with was a car nut, and he wasn't able to speak at seeing so many Mercedes AMGs and there's a Porsche Carrera, which weren't particularly common at the time in Ireland, and so we did we kind of, what was the F your Honda Civic, I have a Porsche outside, was the headline that we used. Good. So but I suppose these guys were coming back, and it was like the old kind of Irish thing of, I've done really well. It wasn't necessarily anything to do with being from Rathkeel. Like, my father talked about guys coming home in Tipperary, home from London, and they'd be wearing a really good suit and buying drink all around, and they'd be going back to live in their hostel in London, a week after. So, like, they'd save up for a week in in Christmas to kind of show off and make it look like they were doing well and acting the big guy. And there's an element of that kind of showing off again, with each other and a bit of sibling rivalry. Now, having said that, in the past, there was one murder well over 20 years ago. There was a stabbing, people got drunk, and there was some row that had originally started over something in Germany, and it was imported back into Rathkeale. So people meet up. They wouldn't see each other 12 months of the year, and then when they're back for funerals or weddings in Rathkeale in the month of December, it's nearly kind of the 6 weeks before Christmas and maybe 2 weeks after it. And there'd be a lot of kind of, I suppose, rivalry and showing off going on, like trying to outbuy drinks in the weddings and stuff like that. And so tempers would sometimes fray, added with drink. There was an elderly lady, I think she was hit by a van and run over a good few years back as well. And that was, but like they hadn't got anything like the recent feuding that started in the last 4 or 5 years that has really kind of really surfaced.
And of course, we have been Rathkeale has been in the news constantly over the last few weeks for a number of reasons. In particular, there's been gun attacks, and also there has been major guard operations, I suppose, to try and nip this in the bud.
Yeah, and look, every year, as I said, they do run it, but they certainly it was about just before the most recent, there was a big series of raids. But before those, there was we did a story about the video. There's bullet holes in a window in a property that's right in the middle of the town, and there was guys were filming the windows and shouting at the would-be attackers, come back now, we're here waiting for you, and threatening that they were cowards for attacking them when no one was in the house. So that's one of the things that's been investigated by the guards. But so they did this. They did this series of raids. Since then, I think it was actually Tuesday, the 2nd of December. Yeah, they carried them out. Yeah, and they went through quite a number of different properties. They seized something like €400,000 in multiple bank accounts and in cash, and a lot of various objects, as the guards put it, were seized. And this included designer bags, watches, and what were believed to be rhino horns. Yeah. So now I suspect they did mention in the press release that they're going to be examined by experts to see if they're true, because there has been, I suppose, a thing of these fake rhino horns swapping hands among some of the Rathkeale traders themselves, because they were selling them for up to $60,000 a kilo. So some of the ones that were stolen were 4 kilos and 6 kilos. So if you add it up, it's quite a lot of money. Yeah. So people were getting fiddled, I suppose. And so I'd wait and see what the experts say, whether they're genuine rhino horns or not as yet.
Yeah, and of course, everybody, you know it so well, Eamon, but some people certainly who aren't of a particular vintage, let's put it that way.
You're not calling me old, are you?
Well, I'm not calling it old, Eamon, but if you're taking it that way. But what were they doing with the rhino horns?
They were selling them to almost directly. They had a middleman in London who had direct connections with the final buyers in Vietnam and China.
And it's part of the traditional medicine.
Effectively it's keratin. It's the same as your fingernails or your hair. So it's absolutely worthless. But it's like a wealthy person would stick up a rhino horn at the top of the table like a Parma ham and scrape off a few flecks to put it into your champagne, which would help with everything from cancer to your erectile dysfunction or whatever you needed cured.
It was a pre-Viagra kind of solution, wasn't it?
Well, it was a cure-all for everything, and I suppose it's the rarity and the fact that it's if you can afford to waste that much money on a rhino horn, you're sending out a vulgar message that you're extremely rich. Yeah. So they were cashing in on this in a I suppose a typical kind of clever way, that while other people were hiring militias or criminal gangs armed with AK-47s to go out and butcher rhino horns in South Africa and Botswana and places like this, and risking gunfights with the Rangers, the Park Life Rangers, they were going to they were picking up the rhino horns that were shot by the colonialists, for the previous 200 years. And they were being found in stately homes in the Czech Republic and in England and in various places. And of course, they were taken off display in the Natural History Museum in Dublin, the original Dead Zoo, but they were stolen from their storage depot out in Swords. Then sometime after that, Michael Flatley had one taken from his house as well. Yeah. And which at the time seemed like a bit of an outlier, but even then, they've been caught in France, transporting these. And again, they were dealing with a group of Chinese business people that were selling them on.
So the Rathkeale Rovers, as they're called, or the Dead Zoo Gang, like, are they the criminal? That's a criminal organisation. Like, are they a coherent criminal organisation? Is it all individuals, working with each other? But is it a structured, organised crime gang?
There would be. They're like all, I suppose, criminal gangs in a sense that there'll be people that will come and go to them, depending on your usefulness and what you're bringing to the game. I mean, it would be a loose arrangement. I mean, certainly the guys involved, the most prolific, say, involved in the rhino horns, aren't people involved in any of the feud violence that's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, they have their own criminal convictions, but not for this sort of stuff. I mean, the kind of 3 years ago, if you remember, there was a video out where there was a number of kind of expensive Jeeps that had been rammed, and somebody down there talking to me was saying they described it as a German war Jeep, and it was one of these big Mercedes 4x4s that was used to carry out the rammings. And in the aftermath, there was like a machete lying on the ground. And we reported at the time that was a kind of a three-way fight between different people involved in serious crime, involved in drug dealing. So you're talking about, the likes of John O'Donoghue, who we've written about before. He was a cab target.
Yeah.
He has convictions for drug dealing in the UK. Cab and their evidence, linked him directly, to meeting with people like Christy Keane and Dermot Plum McManus in a pub in Rathkeale. And he was essentially involved in their big money laundering operation, Bone Motors, as well. So you're talking about people, who are, I suppose, more hardened criminals. And now he himself was originally convicted for a feud-related machete attack. Now there's a 79-year-old man suffered serious injuries, and there was quite a melee, but that conviction was quashed on appeal because they successfully argued there hadn't been any kind of proof of an effort to harvest any CCTV, which they say would have shown that he didn't do it. And the Court of Appeal found rightly, I suppose, in his favour in that one. He was released from that. And funnily enough, then, well, not funnily enough, but it was actually, it would have been his niece last year. If you remember, there's a very high profile death of a 21-year-old woman, Margarita O'Rourke, and she died after she was hit by a gate which had been driven by a van had been driven into a gate, reversed into it, and that was driven by her uncle, Dan O'Donoghue, who would be a brother of John O'Donoghue. And he pleaded guilty to dangerous driving causing death. He's due to be sentenced next month. And it was heard in Limerick court that, he had no issues whatsoever with his niece, but there were tensions between various feuding parties at the time linked to different families. And as a result, this incident happened. And unfortunately, an innocent person died.
Yeah, very, very tragic. I mean, she was a very, very young woman and had just had a baby just weeks before. I mean, a shocking way to lose your life. Now, there was also, one of the interesting things as part of these recent raids was that a wedding store was targeted as well.
So there was a couple of businesses that say are connected to the wedding trade, like venues and people selling dresses and that sort of thing, and that the guards would have gone in, to look for evidence of who spent money. Now, it's important again to mention that it happens all the time. You have businesses who are contacted and are technically raided by the Criminal Assets Bureau, but it doesn't mean that they're involved in any criminality. It's just that they have to do it. I mean, through a warrant. So they have to get the receipts and the records, and it has to be done by the book. So there's no suggestion whatsoever that any of these businesses themselves are involved in crime, but it's a way of showing where they wanted to look for evidence that you had certain individuals that were coming in and putting in large sums of money. You're talking at least 5-figure sums to pay for weddings or to pay for dresses. And it's a way of following the money.
Yeah, and of course it has to be seized under warrant to have a chain of evidence in order to be produced in a court case. So, I mean, I suppose, Rathkeale, does this go on all month, or does it really get at its height then at Christmas week, to how full?
No, I mean, the closer it gets to Christmas, more people turn up. I mean, sometimes people will leave for various reasons. They're not, they're maybe not getting on with other relatives. They might head off to other parts of Ireland. You'll find, that they'll have come and go places, as they call it, in places like Newry or closer to Dublin, or indeed, back to the UK. Like, it's no big deal to go back and forth and maybe spend a week here and then come back again a week later. But it will build up, and I mean, and there is, like, local people do kind of have to put up with a lot because, a lot of the young guys, like they like to drive around, and it's to socialize, but they're doing it without necessarily considering other people are trying to use the road as well. It's a tight town, like in terms of getting around. And sometimes there can be bad behaviour or over boisterous behaviour, let's say, that isn't criminality, but it's enough to kind of make people feel uncomfortable, which I suppose isn't really enough to worry about in one sense. But like the guards do, they seem to be taking it seriously. They're certainly checking for people that might have an arrest warrant out for them from different jurisdictions. I know they've been seizing cars when people haven't been able to produce their documentation straight away. I'm sure in some cases they will get them back. I mean, I know there's been individuals in the past who, they're driving UK and registered cars, luxury cars, and sometimes it's been used by some individuals in the past as a form of money laundering, that they pay over the cash for this car in the UK. And they sell it back while they're in Ireland, sometimes to the people they bought it from, sometimes to other people, and they'll be able to lodge that, a trader's, a car dealer's check goes straight into a bank account, and it's, as far as they're concerned, it appears to be clean money.
Yeah.
So this is all stuff that I'm sure the Criminal Access Bureau have been looking at as well, and it'll form part of their investigations. It does look like they're actually putting on quite an effort to try and track down some of the money this time.
Yeah, and it looks like they're trying to get on top of it. You used to take a traditional trip down to Rathkeel, didn't you,
I did, but
the paper?
I became a bit of a celebrity in the wrong reasons down there. Like, and I'd have to wear a balaclava if I went down there now. I think I was being used then as the bogeyman if a child wasn't being good and they needed to get him or her to go to bed. They'd say, get up to bed or Dylan will get you.
A scary thought, Eamon, a genuinely scary thought. Well, we'll see if we can get a Crime World balaclava on, and maybe you will.
Really stand out, yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Eamon. We'll come back to it over Christmas, no doubt.
No worries, Niall, always a pleasure.